Cool. We'll get started here. Can everyone hear me all right? Awesome. So I want to thank everyone for joining us in our next virtual happy hour. My name's Chris Chappell. I am the Conservation and Brewshed Program Manager over at Washington Wild. I kind of want to start off by saying that, us as an organization, we recognize that, this is a really turbulent time, and we hope all of you are staying well and safe, and that Washington Wild stands behind the ongoing fights for racial equality, and that we acknowledge that there's a deep connection between the fight for racial justice and environmental justice. So that being said, I'm really excited that we're all able to come together to talk about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is protecting the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from drilling. And we're so lucky to have, some of our colleagues up in Alaska speaking to us today about their ongoing fight on the ground. So we're going to start off by showing a short video about Washington Wild, and then we're going to hear from one of our awesome Brewshed Alliance partners, Two Towns, Matt Dickason, who is the cellar master there, is going to speak for a few minutes. So I'm going to get this video started.
On a September evening in 1979, a handful of conservation activists met at the College Inn in Seattle's University District. Hours later, a new organization was born, Washington Wilderness Coalition.
So I've lived in Washington State for 30 years, and it is a diverse state in that it has the Pacific Ocean, mountains, rainforests, deserts, lakes, rivers. Washington Wild is a local organization that protects all of that for all of us. And that is why I'm a proud volunteer for the Washington Wild organization.
Today known as Washington Wild, over the past 40 years, the organization has led efforts to protect nearly 3 million acres of designated wilderness throughout Washington State.
I'm Yvonne Krause. I'm the Executive Director of the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. We as mountain bikers have been working with Washington Wild on a very unique challenge of wanting to support wilderness and supporting that in Washington State, and at the same time losing access when we do so. So it's a unique challenge for us as mountain bikers. It's a very rare partnership with Washington Wild. We've been able to make that happen together, looking at wilderness boundaries, looking at trail alignments, looking at what gives us the best access for both mountain bikers and resource protection. It's very unique. It's been a very treasured partnership, and I look forward to that partnership for 40 more years.
Washington Wild brings people together in the vigorous defense of our remaining ancient forests, free-flowing rivers, wildlife habitat, and clean air and water.
My name is Brian Clattisby, chairman of the Swinomish tribe, and when Swinomish partnered with Washington Wild, we knew it was going to be a good fit to oppose this mining in the headwaters of the Skagit River, which is the only one in the lower 48 that still has every species of wild salmon still spawning in its tributaries. And in 7 generations, our kids need to be standing here telling the same story to those that need to know.
While much has changed over the past 40 years, our national parks, forests, and other public lands are under increasing threats from unregulated mining, new dam construction, and other development.
You must have good quality water to make good quality beer. Being a craft brewer and a fairly small craft brewer compared to the big breweries, we're reliant on producing a quality, consistent product. So locally, we try and do a lot to keep our river clean and pure. And working with Washington Wild, it just helps to expand that throughout the state to keep our natural resources pure. And as a brewery, it's just so important.
Key to their success is building powerful grassroots networks and winning coalitions around protecting our public lands and wild places.
The
mission of Washington Wild to make sure that we preserve low areas where families can have access, and for salmon spawning, it's really critical over the coming 50 years, because that's the kind of wilderness that we will be able to use for generations to come. Washington Wild does a great job that's very unique. It brings together communities, different partnerships to be able to establish the road to get wilderness through Congress. It's not easy to pass legislation. You have to bring people in a community together, different organizations, bring together a whole coalition of people to get the kind of energy to get legislation through Congress. That's what Washington Wild does uniquely and very well.
Join me in supporting Washington Wild's leadership in protecting and defending our local wildlands and waters today and for the next 40 years.
Awesome. Before I introduce Matt with Two Towns, I want to mention that we will be doing a Q&A at the end of the happy hour. So if you have any questions for any of our speakers, feel free to put them in the group chat in Zoom, and we'll get to them at the end. So I'm really, really excited that we have Matt from Two Towns, who's their cellar master. So a little bit of context with Two Towns is they are a Pacific Northwest based cider maker, and they're a very, very, very awesome Brewshed Alliance partner of ours. And during the month of March, they were running their Nature Never Stops campaign, which they vowed to donate a portion of the proceeds from cases of cider to us, with a goal of reaching $5,000. And we're so excited that despite all of the chaos that's kind of going on in the world, that, you know, that campaign was a success, and that we and Two Towns hit our goal. So huge, huge thank you to you, Matt, and everyone at Two Towns for your generous support of conservation in the state of Washington. And I'll turn it over to you. Hopefully the sound works.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you great.
Great. Well, it's pretty awesome to be here. I didn't really think that my job with brewing would connect so well with conservation, but it's kind of done that over the last couple of years. So it's really cool to see you guys coming in and bringing in all these different people for essentially the same purpose. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about Two Towns. Like, we have all these people that appreciate these wild places and understand the importance of them. And, you know, there's just a lot of walks of life and different facets that all can kind of converge, agreeing that this is something that we can all get behind. And in the turmoil of the world right now, I think it's important that we all find some common ground.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. We really appreciate you you coming and speaking with us. I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Tom, right now, who's going to introduce the video and the issue of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. So my name's Tom Uniak. I'm the executive director for Washington Wild. I've actually been here 17 years, pretty amazing. And actually before that, I was in DC and I worked for Defenders of Wildlife. And I spent most of those 7 years actually protecting and trying to defend the Arctic Refuge. So you might say, what does Washington Wild have to do with the Arctic Refuge? Well, all of us who care about wild places, the Arctic Refuge has been called America's Serengeti. It is, you know, if not one of our last best wildernesses. And so from my perspective, our organization is about protecting Washington's wild places. And, you know, we need to be able to protect the kind of the Arctic refuge if we're going to be able to protect the North Cascades and the Wild Olympics and places like that. So it's also very personal to me. Like I said, I spend a lot of time, defending the Arctic refuge. The other side, the folks that want to drill, are very crafty. I can remember when the budget reconciliation in 1994 or so became like the latest trick. And Alaska Wilderness League has been there the whole time. And they're a great organization. We're really glad to partner with them. And they have shared with us a great video that we're going to show next. It tells the story of this incredible place. And it also, most importantly, tells the story of the folks that truly call it home. And that's the Gwich'in people. And we're going to have a chance to hear from one of their own later in the show. So with that, I think, Chris, we can go ahead and show the video, and we'll continue the program after that.
Thanks, Tom.
The land is everything. Money is short term. The land will always be here for us. We, Gwich'in people, have the inherent right to continue to live our own way of life. That right depends upon clean air, clean water, a clean environment, our own food security, which is based entirely on the porcupine caribou herd. Current threat, the United States passed a tax cut bill. The line item included provisions to drill the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That's the last 5% of America's public land in the Arctic that's still protected. That's the last 5%. 95% is already owned and can be drilled for oil in Alaska's North Slope.
Every single president tried, and not one president was successful in getting it. I said, you gotta be kidding, I love it now. And after that, we fought like hell to get ANWR.
How do they plan to feed our communities once the caribou do not migrate near our communities anymore? How are they going to restore a culture when it's taken? It's ingrained in my blood to fight for this land and our rights. We're not compromising or negotiating the future of our young people. I'm Faith Gemmel, and it's Gwich'in.
Oops. Cool. Hope you guys all enjoyed that video. We're going to hear next briefly from my colleague Evan of Washington Wild, and then we're going to hear from our awesome guest speakers from the Alaskan Wilderness League. So go ahead, Evan.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Evan. I'm the Director of Development here at Washington Wild, and I want to thank Matt and Two Towns for joining us tonight and being a great community partner of ours. We really appreciate all the support that you and your team have given us over the years. And also thank you to everybody who decided to spend their Wednesday evening with us. We typically, invest and focus on in-person events, but these happy hours actually have allowed us to connect with people from all over and keep you informed on our work and how to take action. So they've surprisingly been really awesome. This is our 6th one, and we want to continue to do these, multiple times throughout the year for all those that, don't have the time or are unable to attend our events in person. So here at Washington Wild, we're very proud of our conservation accomplishments that we've had not only over the past 6 months, but more so over the past 40 years. And it may seem like we have a big staff, but actually we are just a team of 6. So what makes all this work possible is the coalition building, it's finding that common ground and generating community support. So your support powers this work and keeps it moving forward. So if you are able, please consider making a donation to Washington Wild that is meaningful to you. You can do so very simply on our website, which is wawild.org. So that's www.wawild.org. And again, we appreciate you taking the time, hearing about our work, and for all those that continue to support us in the number of ways that you've done so in the past. So thank you again. And next, I'd like to introduce 2 folks that are working and living up in Alaska on this issue, Andy Moderow and Jody Juneby Potts. So Andy, go ahead.
I think actually Jody might kick us off, if you can hear.
Okay.
Cool. Give me 1 sec, I'm looking for you.
Okay.
Cool. Go ahead, Jody.
All right. Good afternoon, or maybe good evening, everyone, depending on where you're at. My name is Jody Juneby Potts. I am Hongwich Inn from Eagle Village, Alaska, on the Upper Yukon, and I am a Alaska Wilderness League board member. I work for Native Movement, which is a grassroots indigenous environmental rights organization, and I've been I was born and raised here in Alaska, and I am was very much raised close to the land, and our family lived off the land. So hunting caribou for our food and our clothing and for our way of life was just central and key to our survival. And still to this day, I take my children out hunting, and it's an important part of our life. And so it's really great to be here with everyone. Thank you guys for all joining and calling in. I really appreciate all the allies we have from around the country and really around the world. The Gwich'in people, I work really closely with the Gwich'in Steering Committee, and we've been advocating for, close to 40 years. Actually, my daughter is the 4th generation of Gwich'in to be leading this fight to protect the porcupine caribou herd from and their birthing grounds from oil development. And so we ultimately have been following our elders' wishes in fighting to protect our way of life and our caribou. Our elders met, actually all the Gwich'in tribes met, like I think in 1985. And from that, they said, we have to do this in a good way and we won't compromise. And so we haven't compromised. And through the years, we've gained a lot of important allies, and they've been really helpful. And so we appreciate every single one of you. You know, it's been very challenging times for everyone in the world, but particularly the United States. And, you know, I just have been reflecting a lot the last week and really thinking a lot about how, you know, the violence to our land, all of these proposals, and I think definitely under the Trump administration, it's just increased tenfold on our sacred lands, which oftentimes are also public lands. And the threats to our sacred lands and way of life is really also a human rights issue for our Gwich'in people. We need our healthy environment, and we need healthy caribou to provide for our children, for our culture, spirituality. And without the caribou, we really fear what would happen to our people. And so as this threat has been amped up in this current administration, we also have been working really hard. And then, I think about the violence that has been happening to people of color and African Americans for a very long time. And I think about just the history of America, America is apparently has these values of freedom and justice and liberty for all. And it just doesn't feel for certain groups of people in this country that we do have that freedom to live how we want, and these attacks on our sacred lands and our way of life through development proposals really inhibit our ability to continue living the life that we want to have. And that's important to us, just because it may not be in line with the American dream. And, as we reflect on American values and the fact that America was very much founded on stolen land with stolen people, and the success of America becoming a superpower was really on the backs of Indigenous and Black people. And we, as Gwich'in, as Native movement, stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters of color as they seek justice, just as we as Gwich'in seek justice and try to protect our people and our way of life. We also seek the same for our brethren. And so, the connection between the violence in this country, whether it's on a person of color by the government or our lands, is very much connected and interrelated. And it goes back generations, from Manifest Destiny to the foundation of this country. And so, it's time for a change. And I know that a lot of you understand that and get that. But we need systematic change, and that will help us with this fight on climate change. It'll help us with protecting public lands for everyone. And this won't, where our big goal is, of course, to make sure that everyone has the freedom to continue their way of life and to live the way that they want. And that's what we as Gwich'in people want to do, to be able to provide a cultural and healthy and strong future for our children, just like many other people in this country. So I just want to say thank you very, very much for including Gwich'in voice on this call. It means a lot, and I would, when the time is right, I'd gladly take questions. So thank you all so much. And Andy, if you want to go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody. I'm really grateful you could make it today. And I think we're all reflecting on, the pandemics that we are facing. I'm feeling like we're facing two in this country right now. One's been with us for hundreds of years, and you pointed that out, and it's rearing up right now at a time when we're also locked into our homes. So it's great to be with like-minded folks talking about places that are near and dear to us in this time. So thanks, everyone. My name's Andy Moderow. I'm based in Anchorage, Alaska, and I grew up in Alaska. Some of my earliest memories were in Denali Park. I'll say that the landscapes are what inspired me, but as I've dove deeper into this work with, Alaska Wilderness League, I'm staying for the people, and I'm staying for the story that you saw in the video, and I'm staying because I don't want to be part of a generation that is taking away the thousands of years of traditions on Alaska lands. What we call Alaska now, Alaska is a new construct, right? I don't want to be part of a generation that destroys that for the future. And so really, really grateful that you could join us, Jody, and that the video could kick us off. The people and place in Alaska are tied closely together. And a little more about the Arctic Refuge. At 20 million acres, that's the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. It's a place that earned protections in this modern construct of Alaska, first in 1960. In 1980, protections were expanded to what we have today, the 20 million acres that are protected, somewhat protected. And it was expanded to protect the clean water, the wildlife, the birds, and also the subsistence traditions that take place that are thousands of years old. The coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge is up on the very top of Alaska, and it's about 30 to 50 miles wide. To the south of it is the Brooks Range, and to the north is the Arctic Ocean. And this landscape is the biological heart of the Arctic Refuge. It's a little ways away from you in Washington. It's 2,600 miles from Seattle, just to give you a little idea, to the northwest. It's a land of extremes. In the summer, the sun does not set. In the winter, the darkest months, it does not come up. I looked up the average temperatures today, just a little more trivia. In February, the average temperature is 20 below zero. And in July, it warms up to a balmy 47. So that gives you an idea of this place. And yet it is one of the most spectacular, diverse place of life that you can experience and see in the globe. And it really is home to extraordinary wildlife species. The most inspiring, to me at least, is the porcupine caribou herd. 200,000 animals strong and one of the largest land mammal migrations left on Earth. When you look at a map of where the porcupine caribou herd goes in their over 1,000-mile journey each year, it aligns with the Gwich'in Nation territory, both in Canada and in the US. But really, there's one dirt road that they cross way over in Canada. It is the landscape where this is one of the few places where we have a migration that's not cut up by industrialization. And I think that's really, really inspiring. The Arctic Refuge is home to a whole bunch of birds, and if you like birds, there's probably somebody on this call who's a huge fan. The bird that flies from the Arctic Refuge down to your neck of the woods is the varied thrush, but it ties together our country that way. And it's home to all species of bears. Wolverine are my personal favorite, just because of their attitude. But it's really a unique corner of Alaska. And I wish we could end the presentation there. I wish we were done with that, because the merits of keeping this place whole for the values and the traditions it provides, that really would be great. But unfortunately, it got a little more complicated. And that was when oil was speculated to be underneath the coastal plain. Alaska's recent history of oil really took off in 1977 when the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was completed. Since then, oil's been flowing south to Valdez, where it's then shipped off to market. And when ANILCA, the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, expanded the Arctic Refuge, language was put into the law which says that the Arctic Refuge coastal plain couldn't be drilled without a further act of Congress. The Arctic Refuge was protected by that language for almost 50 attempts, several decades, as lawmakers tried to open it up. But they always lost, fortunately. There was one time actually during the Clinton administration when the House and the Senate both passed the bill, but Clinton was able to veto it, and that kept drilling rigs off. Then came 2016 and the election of President Trump. And not only was Trump elected, but Congress was in control of both houses. His party had control of both. So with leadership, we had aligned government, right? And that opened the window potentially, didn't guarantee it, potentially to Section 1002 of the law, which is what protected the Arctic Refuge coastal plain from drilling, to potentially be repealed. So January 2017, right? We can all flash back to that time, and that actually shows you how close the light is at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, knock on wood. You have to do it every time you say it, but that was through, over 3 years ago, right? Flash back to those days, and President Trump ran on repealing healthcare reform, right? Well, that didn't work out. And one of the key reasons that didn't work out for him was Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski. Now, Murkowski, took those actions, and it actually built her a lot of power in Washington, D.C. She was also the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which puts her in a spot to be able to influence things like Arctic Refuge drilling. And, flash forward to December 2017, you have basically a president and Congress unable to get anything done, and they're working on tax reform. They needed to be certain they could count on Senator Murkowski's vote. So they gave into her committee's purview, the job of finding $1 billion for the Treasury. And where did she happen to find it? Drilling in the Arctic Refuge. In the end, she added 2 pages to the Tax Act. And not only did it authorize potential drilling, it mandated 2 lease sales to take place in the future, one in 2021, by 2021, and one by 2024. So it didn't say you can have a lease sale, it said you will have them by then. It also required that each of those lease sales are 400,000 acres in size. And that made it so a friendly administration to us couldn't come in and say, here's your lease sale, here's a square foot, right? And that was unfortunate. It put BLM in charge of these lease sales, which is Fish and Wildlife Refuge, right? That was a change. And most egregious, at least in principle to me, it added oil and gas development to a purpose of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. No other national wildlife refuge had that purpose added to it. And that's what these 2 pages did. So just to give you a little bit more of the background and why I think we have a lot of reason for hope in this fight. In 2018, after this bill passed, the 2 pages that authorized this drilling, the Trump administration quickly got working on a leasing plan. They had a scoping period, and actually that video was taken during scoping, I believe. And that was the chance for the people to weigh in about what they're worried about. In 2019, they were fast tracking, getting the leasing plan done, identifying what needs to happen for leases to be able to go out the door. And they put a draft environmental impact statement out, which is a fancy way to say they're working really hard to, figure out how to lease it. They said last year their goal is to have that lease sale, the one mandated by 2021, at the end of 2019. So not only was it fast tracked to try to do it in 4 years, they were trying to do it in 2. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And today we're waiting for a record of decision on that leasing plan. When that comes out, there's going to be, as soon as 60 days after, a lease sale to open up and offer up these areas to oil and gas companies. All while this is going on, there's been another threat. It's not just leasing that is an issue, but also seismic exploration. And the way seismic exploration is done, trains of bulldozers and thumper trucks, some weighing 90,000 pounds, that's like, 20 of my Toyota Tacomas, traverse tundra when it's frozen, and they drive about 1,000 feet apart, thumping the tundra, trying to map the oil reserves underneath the lands. There was a push in 2018 to make that happen. It didn't happen. There were a variety of reasons it didn't. And I think it's a threat that still looms somewhat, although with this pandemic taking hold, it's less likely to come to fruition, I think. So this is the landscape for the Arctic Refuge. You've seen the inspiring story, you know of it. We all have our different connections to it, whether it's an idea or whether it's a place with thousands of years of history. And I think that, it's a scary time for the Arctic Refuge. All that being said, I definitely still have hope in this fight. And that is because despite the administration's attempt, no industrialization has happened on the Arctic Refuge coastal plain yet. Part of that is the laws of the land still apply. 2 pages in the Tax Act can't get rid of the Endangered Species Act. It can't get rid of NEPA, right? And when the draft EIS got done, our comment letter, the Collective Conservation Community comment letter, was longer than their draft EIS. We have lots of people looking very hard at making sure they're following all the laws of the land. And I think they're gonna have a hard time driving an oil rig through a loophole because of that. 1.7 million people weighed in, and it was like 99% in favor of protecting the Arctic Refuge during the comment periods. So if you did that, thank you. We really appreciate the support. If you maybe hadn't heard of the issue yet, no worries at all. There's ways you can get involved that I'll talk about next. But I think 1.7 million people, that's really inspiring. Consistently, 2/3 to 70% of the American people don't want to see this happen, right? And the House actually this year, once the Democratic Party regained control of the House, has a bill to restore protections for the Arctic Refuge coastal plain to a place where there isn't a mandated lease sale. That bill passed the House this year by a vote of 225 to 193. Jody, you were there. That was a pretty exciting week, and 182 people have co-sponsored that bill. and they're poised and ready to pass it next year if we kind of push them. It's all these things are data points that get me excited. This is going to be a fight where we need to restore legislative protections. That's a key part of making certain oil companies don't get access to the Arctic Refuge coastal plain. The ask I have of you is, if there is a lease sale, we will let you know. And we're really grateful for partners like Washington Wild that mobilize folks and let them know that this is an issue that needs noise and it needs it now. I would definitely say, whenever you can tell people who represent you that even though you're in Washington, you care about this, that is very helpful to the cause. And so we appreciate any of that. And then finally, another point that's really inspiring right now that you might have seen in the paper is 5 out of the 6 major US banks have said they won't finance drilling in the Arctic Refuge. And that's because of the hard work of the Gwich'in Steering Committee, groups like Sierra Club, the whole coalition. And that's partly because hundreds of thousands of people have asked them not to finance those projects. So there's a final bank we're after. It's Bank of America. I saw an action shared in the chat at the bottom of the screen. That's a meaningful thing you can do today if you want to help. And in the end, I'm hopeful. I think we got history on our side. We have the American public on our side. All they have on their side is a desire to make money on this place. And I think in the end, we're going to win it. So I'll leave it at that. I really appreciate everyone's time tonight. And Jody and I would both love to answer any questions you have. If we start talking too much about oil economics and politics, though, we might need another hour. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Andy. Yeah, thank you to the both of you for speaking on this issue and for all your hard work in Alaska. It's seriously appreciated and really, really inspiring. So we're going to take a quick, before we get into the questions, I'm actually going to take a quick second or a couple minutes and ask all of you to go to the link in the chat for the action alert is, and I'm gonna ask all of you to take that action right now. And so we can do this as a community, and we can all, use our voices to ask the final bank to vow not to drill in the Arctic. So I'm going to share my screen real fast and show you how easy it is to take action. So if you click the link, you'll be brought to this page. Just scroll down, put in your name, your first name, last name, email address, address line. The message is already written for you, and click take action. It is seriously as simple as that, and these actions, together go such a long ways. So I'm going to just pause here for a minute and give you all the opportunity and the time to take action. Cool. Well, then we'll get into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and we'll get to them here in a second. So the first question is for Jody, and it is, how can indigenous nations and non-indigenous people of Washington support you in fighting for the Arctic? Ooh, Jody, hold on a second. You're still muted.
Okay. There we go.
Cool.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah,
good.
thanks.
Well, I would say how other organizations and individuals can support Native nations. Most definitely, you can go to you can look at the Gwich'in Steering Committee website, and you can see our values and our stand on this, and you can educate yourself and educate those around you for sure. And you can also look at Native movement. And one of the things that we have been planning, Andy was talking about the final environmental impact statement on the Arctic Refuge in the 1002 area where they want to drill. on the coastal plain. We are waiting for the ROD to be released. And once that's released, we are planning actions. It will probably have to be virtually. And we are planning on doing nationwide. We were planning on doing nationwide rallies. But what we're planning on now is to do things virtually, letters, of course, contact your congressional delegations, and also educate yourselves as well on what it means and how to be a better partner to Indigenous causes like this, to Indigenous nations. We follow the HAMES principles, and so you can find the HAMES principles on nativemovement.org. We also work with Defend the Sacred Alaska, and on the defendthesacredalaska.org website, we have a toolkit on an action toolkit that you could review, and stay tuned to this cause. Like, keep following it, we work really hard with our partners, and there's a lot of partners that work really good with us on amplifying the Gwich'in voices on this cause. The Alaska Wilderness League, among others, actually everyone in the coalition, and this very much is a Gwich'in-led, human rights-led issue. And so amplifying Gwich'in voices, following all of our, if you guys are on social media, follow and share those, from our Arctic Refuge on Instagram, Gwich'in Steering Committee, Alaska Wilderness League. All of those are also good resources to stay informed, but also to share and inform others. So there's a start there. So yeah, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Jody. We actually have another question for you.
Okay.
This person is asking that you mentioned that only 5% of Alaska Wildlife Refuge is left, with the remaining 95% already owned. Is there a primary stakeholder that owns the 95%?
The 95% of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? I actually don't know the answer to that. I do know that Alaska is very checkerboarded, and maybe Andy could better explain the land ownership. I mean, Alaska is very complex between ANILCA, Alaska National Lands Conservation. I forget the rest of the acronym, but so we've had, and also the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Alaska is very checkerboarded. Even within national parks, you will find native allotments, you will find native corporation lands. And so I couldn't tell you all of the land ownership things in that state, but I do know that within the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, there is ownership by Inupiaq corporations that were founded under ANCSA.
And did you?
Sure, yeah, Jody hit the nail on the head, and the specifics of that video, and that was actually a Faith from Arctic Village speaking in it. The 5% referred to the statutory protections that put the coastal plain off limits to oil and gas development. There is the checkerboard that Jody said across the entirety of the Arctic in the US, and there is lands actually within the coastal plain that she referenced, 92,000 acres, where the subsurface rights are owned by some native corporations. But in particular, that 5% was referring to the statutory protections that used to exist for the coastal plain. That's what Congress got rid of. There's other areas to the west that are really important to a whole bunch of different values that we care about. Those lands have some management plan protections, but not statutory protections that prohibit oil and gas development. So after the Tax Act passed, pretty much the entirety of the land north of the Brooks Range has no statutory protections, putting it off limits for oil and gas development. And yeah, it's amazing that we can't set this place aside.
Cool. Well, if we don't, I don't think we have any more questions. Cool. Matt, do you by chance want to speak about how Two Towns is involved in, conservation issues? give you the last word if you're interested.
Sure. And I just want to thank Andy for the information and the historical context. I'm not the most well-read on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but it was really nice to hear. And I really especially want to thank Jody for giving us her personal and Indigenous perspective, because I think that's super important right now, especially when we're talking about conservation issues. The original people that inhabited the land really should get some more input than they're getting, and I really love to hear that entire message and everything that comes along with it. So I do appreciate that. As far as Two Towns and conservation are concerned, the best stuff that I can relate to and been participating in is I'm part of a couple different local conservation groups around hunting and land management, public lands with Oregon Hunter Association and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers and the Teddy Roosevelt Conservancy Partnership. And, you know, it's just, we all agree on public lands being a thing that we all use, we all need, that are super critical to the most important tenets of kind of everything that is involved with this: clean air, clean water, and you know, a pristine environment, essentially. And it's, you know, I don't know much about the Arctic specifically, but the principles still apply, where we have a limited amount of wildlands, wilderness, and these places just really need to be protected. And the fact that Two Towns and myself and you guys, and like as a group, we can all agree on this is just so important. And I think unity is the message that we really need to drive home here. And if, you know, if we can, you know, make a few carbonated beverages and put a few smiles on people's faces and kind of contribute to that cause, that's great. And I really appreciate all you guys on the front lines doing the legislative business, the protesting, the letter writing. Everything is just like, there's just so many different pieces to the puzzle that are so important to conservation. And I guess I just want to close by saying, I want to quote one of my favorite conservationists, is just kind of a farmer from Wisconsin. His name's Doug Duran, but he has a quote that says, "It's not ours, it's our turn." And I really agree with that sentiment. And I think that's just the message that we need to push moving forward when it comes to everything from our you know, monuments, wild places, the wilderness, everything. And I really appreciate everything all you guys are doing. And Two Towns is super happy to partner with all of you.
Awesome. Well said, Matt. That was great quote to end with. And thank you so much. And thank you, Andy, and thank you, Jody, for being with us today. Seriously, this has probably been my favorite happy hour so far. Don't tell the other ones, but the information was amazing, and, you know, really inspiring stuff on all fronts. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you all so much. If you haven't taken action yet, the link is there, and the link is on our website, wawild.org. Yeah, thanks everyone so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Cheers.